I don't know where in the 5 days and 6 hours this conscious period that I recalled at that point occurred. You know, whether it was immediately after being hit by that energy, or whether it was immediately before being let off, or maybe some other point in between. You know, I speculate that you know, I'm pretty convinced now that there was a period of time during the 5 days in which I was conscious and experienced interactions with some of these beings, but I you know, don't have any details to report, just, you know, vague sorts of things. But part of that time was probably in some sort of an unconscious or injured state, you know, some sort of a coma or induced coma, or some sort of procedures involved in correcting the damage from being hit by that blast of energy. You know, at the time, all I could remember was this short period of time. That was the reason that I thought it was still the same night. Because all I remembered was this short period of time, so, you know, that wouldn't take 5 days, you know. There was no reason to think there was anything other than the same day, just later on the same Wednesday. When I regained consciousness, I was in such pain that it would actually sort of knock me back out again, the pain, you know, to come to consciousness and be hit with this wall of pain, you know, you back off from that into unconsciousness, you know. It sort of like knocked me back out again. But I didn't know where I was. I didn't realize the danger and the fearful situation I was in at that point. But I knew something was terribly wrong with my body, especially my inability to get enough oxygen. This feeling of suffocation generated a panic in me that even through the haze of pain and semi-consciousness, you know, still added to this desperate feeling. And added to that was the feeling that I couldn't move, you know. I mean, I could move, but it was so difficult to move. It was like, you know, everything was heavy, like I was so extra weak or whatever. Later I wondered if the gravity in that craft was heavier than Earth gravity. That's still a possibility. A part of it may have just been hypoxia, you know, or a result of the injury. But for some reason I felt extremely weak. It could have been partly due to the efforts of these beings to keep me subdued, sedated in some way with the, you know, the kind of telepathic or mental control methods that they're supposed to have. For whatever reason, you know, it was hard to move, but when I tried, it was painful. It added to the pain. I was lying on my back. I was looking up at a light over me, and at first I said, you know, not realizing, you know, where I was or what had happened. Then I remembered approaching this object, you know, the amazing sight in the woods, but I thought that somehow I'd been hurt, because my last thought was retreat, run back to the truck. So I thought, you know, that maybe I'd been hurt running back to the truck, fall and hit my head or something, that you know, run under a limb and hit my head on a tree. Something like that. You know, your blind panic running away from something, you might turn around to look what might be chasing you and run smack into a tree. You know, those are the kinds of impressions that I had, that somehow I'd hurt myself and I was in a hospital. You know, I could tell I was probably on some kind of a raised surface. It may have been my hands were falling off the edge of the table, on the edge or something. The impression, you know, added to, because the ceiling and light above me were so close. I thought I was in a hospital. You know, it was an alarming situation to think that I had been, you know, hurt that seriously. You know, the pain was very great. It was excruciating. So I figured I had some pretty serious injury, but I felt I was probably safe in a hospital, that I was being taken care of. There was some sort of device across my chest. I had a lot of pain in my chest. So maybe this thing was some sort of treatment, or, you know, I didn't know. I couldn't see all that clearly. It was blurry and double vision. And I could hear the sounds of movement around me, and I just took this to be doctors, that things were being taken care of. I was on some sort of a raised table, a gurney operating table or something. And then when I looked in the direction of the movement sounds, you know, I could see blurry forms that I thought were doctors wearing surgical caps and masks, you know, with just an area across where the eyes would be that would be uncovered by that. But when I sharpened the focus in my eyes, I could see that was not the case, that I was looking into the face of this creature. And then I knew I was not in the hospital, and I was in very great danger. I felt that, you know, this was extremely life-threatening. And here this face was so close to me, another right behind him, that, you know, the fear gave me the strength to raise my arm and try to hit him away. But it was so weak, I could barely move my arm, and it wouldn't have killed a fly. It pushed the one that was standing close to me back, and he fell into the other one. But almost in the same motion, I was rolling away from him, and this object across my chest fell off. But my attention was riveted on them. They were immediately coming around the table towards me. I got on my feet and staggered back. I felt very weak and unsteady, and I backed up. I was actually sort of stumbling backwards, and I bumped up against a shelf or a workbench, and there was an array of instruments laying out there. It was just a quick glance. I didn't stand there and study them. I was just riveted on these creatures coming towards me. I just glanced, grabbed the biggest thing I could find, and started flailing in their direction to keep them from coming any closer. And they stopped, and at that moment was the peak of the fear and you know, the focus of my nightmares for months afterwards was this point at which they stopped with their hands extended towards me and staring in a way that felt invasive and intrusive, like they were looking inside of me in a way that just gave me this squirmy feeling in my head that it was agonizing. It was horrible. For a long time, I thought it was just the countenance, just looking into their faces, and the threat that they were approaching. But, you know, I came to realize that it had to do with the stare, and the stare was them trying to reassert control. I think that, you know, somehow they were acting in unison, all of them, to try to combine their power to, you know, to calm me or keep me from, you know, doing them any harm, at least, you know, but to get me back under control, and it wasn't working. That was a traumatic moment, to, you know, the face-off with these creatures. But, you know, once it was apparent they weren't going to physically or even telepathically control me, they turned and left the room and went to the right. And I went out the passageway, afraid that they would return to that room with reinforcements or whatever. And so I went in the opposite direction that they had gone. Continually fearful that they were still pursuing me, but in a passageway that was very cramped, claustrophobic to the max because it was dimly lit, very small space, and I was struggling to breathe the whole time. Just adding and adding to the panic was this feeling of suffocation, this feeling I was about to pass out from lack of air. And were they behind me? Were they pursuing me? Or was around this tight curve that I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, was I going to run into something worse? So, you know, all this compounding the fear, looking desperately for just a way to escape any way I could, you know, sort of a blind struggle to just open a door and get out of here, you know. Partly the feeling of being trapped, partly the feeling of suffocation, claustrophobia. And I'm not a claustrophobic person, although I enjoy the wide open spaces and the out of doors. You know, contrast my normal environment to this dimly lit, humid, cramped, dimly lit little space occupied by these bizarre beings. So, in my panic, I ran past one doorway, just more fearful of what was behind me than even, you know, just putting a little distance, little as it was, between me and them. It possibly could have even been an escape route, but, you know, I was out of control with fear. I came to a doorway, got a little better grip on, and looked in, and I saw doorways on the opposite side of this little round room in there. So I was thinking to cross over, open one of them doors, and perhaps escape. You know, in hindsight, checking out reconstructing what the interior layout was, it wouldn't have possibly led to an outside, but that's what I was thinking at that point. When I moved into the room, I didn't move directly into the center of the room at first because I was fearful of the chair in the middle. It was a high back chair, and I was afraid there could be someone sitting in it. So when I moved to the side and could see that there was no one in it, then I moved towards the chair. And it was then that I realized that the closer I came to the center of the room, the more it appeared, the walls appeared to darken. The walls, the floor, the ceiling were darkened except for points of light. Now this looked to me much like, you know, the night sky out in the woods, where you see, you know, far more stars than you see in any city. It was a planetarium kind of a projection, or perhaps even a way of viewing where this thing was at, an actual view of the outside. But whatever it was, you know, my main concern was open these doors. When I went to what I thought were doors, I'm not even certain they were doors, they probably were, but it was just a rectangle on the wall with a rather smooth surface. You know, the door was just level with the wall, but there was no doorknob, no button to push it. I saw no way to open it. I don't know if they operate these things with their minds or whatever, but I assumed that perhaps the buttons that were on the arm of this chair might open the door. I tried some of them. None of them seemed to, well, most of them didn't seem to do anything. There was some that seemed to move these lines, black lines on this screen. Nobody had ever heard of touch screen in those days, and I didn't touch the screen to see if that affected anything on the screen. I did move the arm, the lever on the arm of the chair, and that moved the star pattern, which was very disorienting. You know, it was a kind of a dizzying sort of feeling to have all of these reference points move in unison. I was already unsteady on my feet, and so it was kind of gave me more vertigo than I already had. And I was thinking of pushing another button, thinking, you know, one of these has to open one of these doors. And then my attention was suddenly diverted, whether it was a change in the light from the door that I'd just come through, or a sound. I'm not sure what, or maybe just something out of the corner of my eye. But I turned, and there was a man in the door that I just come through. And I immediately, you know, this was a familiar human form. It was very reassuring to me to think that this was somebody there to rescue me. You know, police or military, Air Force, NASA, something, you know. And so I started towards him and was just babbling, you know, questions and trying to tell him about these creatures that were in there. And it was very, probably looked pretty crazy, you know, the frantic, the hysteria that I was displaying there.
Just describe what he looked like.
This was a human-looking being. This was somebody that would pass in a crowd. You know, a tall, young man, light-colored hair, light-colored eyes. Something odd about the eyes. I wasn't really focused on that at that point because he had this glass helmet over his head. But at this point, I was mainly trying to get a response about where I was and where you know, get me out of here sort of thing. So when he took me by the arm and was leading me out. You know, I figured this was a rescue, and I was only very happy to go. So we went through what I think was an airlock. You know, this door closed and that door opened, and we went out, and the air was cooler and fresher and so much easier to breathe. But I was almost blinded by the brightness. It was just, you know, normal soft sunlight sort of look, but it's so much brighter than the interior of that craft. And but so much of a relief to be in a cooler, easier to breathe situation. We went down this really steep ramp, and I really had to sort of watch. I was, sort of hanging on to him because I was unsteady on my feet. The ramp was had a very sure gripping surface. It wasn't corrugated or had any bumps or major surface features to it. It was just some kind of surface that you could walk on without falling down. But I tried to look around just a little bit. I was mainly concerned about where he was taking me. And he seemed to be in a hurry because he was making me move faster than I felt able to. I was weak and unsteady on my feet. I glanced around enough to see that there were some other disc-shaped craft parked inside of this enclosure. At this point, the craft we came out of was parked inside of this big hangar-like building, or it might have been part of a larger craft. Some people think it was like a mothership or something, or it could have been like just an airplane hangar somewhere. The wall behind us was composed of glowing panels that curved up into the ceiling. So, you know, the room was shaped like a quarter of a cylinder laid on its side. And but he led me towards the vertical wall opposite this that was just solid wall. It wasn't made out of glowing panels. And through some doors down a hallway, and we went through some other doors into a room where there were some other people. They were very similar to him. A similar dress, similar coloring, you know, light colored hair, light colored eyes. But it was there that I started to notice something sort of unusual about the eyes. But again, my focus was on where am I, what's happening to me, you know, what just happened to me, what are you doing with me? And then I wasn't getting answers to these questions. And I started to become alarmed that this wasn't a rescue at all, that I was still in some kind of terrible situation. Do I trust these people? They won't even answer me. And they're leading me. They're, you know, taking me by the arm and putting me over towards this table. And then so I started to pull back. If they're not going to answer my questions, I'm not cooperating. And they were so much stronger than I was. They actually felt stronger than a normal person. You know, I worked in the woods, and you know, I could take a chainsaw on either hand and hold it straight out to the side on either side, you know, which is quite a feat of strength. You know, I got pictures of that. But you know, they were able to easily subdue me. I was in a weakened condition, but I felt their strength. But still, the panic I had at being restrained like that, I was able to jerk one hand free. And they put this mask over my face, and I got my finger under the edge of that trying to pull it away. You know, I was probably hypersensitive to a claustrophobic kind of reaction. But before I could pull it away, boom, I was out. I think there was some kind of a gas in there that was like a anesthesia or something. But there was something odd about those eyes. And, you know, I worked with an artist to do my best. I probably ought to do some more drawings to try to figure that out. You know, here, even 38 years later, there was something about the eyes that was just not quite familiar.